The last thing my husband expected to hear that Sunday afternoon was my voice saying only 3 words. Lock the doors. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge. But because after 26 years of marriage, I finally understood something that should have been obvious long before that day. The people sitting around that dining table had never wanted me in their family. And in less than 72 hours, every single one of them would be begging me to stay. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 58 years old, and until recently I believed that patience could fix almost anything. I spent 32 years as a financial auditor in Charlotte, North Carolina. Numbers never lied to me. People did. If you've spent enough years reading contracts, checking balance sheets, and finding the tiny details everyone else ignores, you develop a strange habit. You stop listening to what people say. You start watching what they do. That's probably why I noticed my marriage ending almost 2 years before my husband realized I knew. His name is Richard Dawson. When we met, he was funny. Quiet. The kind of man who apologized when he accidentally stepped on someone's foot. The kind of man who remembered birthdays without reminders. The kind of man who used to bring me coffee every Friday morning because he knew I hated starting work before sunrise. I married that man. The one who stood beside me during my mother's funeral. The one who painted our first apartment himself because we couldn't afford contractors. The one who promised me we'd grow old together. Somewhere along the way, he disappeared. People always ask when a marriage dies. They're expecting one dramatic answer. An affair. A betrayal. A confession. But marriages don't usually die like that. They die quietly. One forgotten conversation at a time. One cold dinner. One empty apology. One weekend where someone chooses somewhere else to be. Until one day you wake up next to someone whose breathing you recognize. But whose heart became a stranger years ago. I didn't notice it immediately. Or maybe I refused to. Richard had started spending more evenings with his younger brother, Daniel. Family business, he always said. Investment meetings. Property discussions. Weekend trips. The explanations always sounded reasonable. Reasonable things are dangerous. Because they leave you feeling guilty for asking questions. About a year before everything collapsed, Richard insisted we start attending Sunday dinners at his mother's house again. Every single Sunday. His mother, Margaret, had never liked me. She wasn't cruel. Cruel people are easier to understand. She preferred something quieter. Every compliment carried a comparison. Every smile had a criticism. Every conversation somehow reminded everyone that Richard could have done better. For 26 years. I smiled anyway. Not because I was weak. Because I believed peace was worth protecting. That Sunday. The Sunday everything changed. There were 12 people around the table. Richard. His mother. His brother. Daniel's wife. 3 cousins. 2 neighbors. And me. Dinner started normally. Roast chicken. Fresh bread. Homemade pie. The kind of family meal people post online pretending every family has. Then Margaret asked Richard about the new investment company. He smiled. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. We're expanding faster than expected, he said proudly. Daniel laughed. The bank finally approved the commercial loan. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone except me. Because I knew something no one else at that table knew. The loan approval letter had never actually been approved. I had seen the original paperwork 3 weeks earlier. By accident. Or at least, that's what Richard believed. He thought I'd walked into his office looking for my reading glasses. He never realized I'd recognized the logo on the folder sitting open beside his laptop. The logo belonged to a client I'd audited years before. One glance was enough. The numbers didn't match. The signatures didn't match. And the approval date had been altered. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not for the next 3 weeks. Because accusing someone without proof is emotion. Waiting until the proof comes to you is strategy. That afternoon, while everyone celebrated the company's future, I simply sipped my iced tea and listened. Richard noticed. He always noticed when I became quiet. "What do you think, Claire?" 12 faces turned toward me. I smiled. "I think success built on solid foundations lasts longer." Nobody understood what I meant. Nobody except Richard. For just a second. His smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then Margaret laughed. "Oh Claire," she said. "You're always so serious." Everyone laughed with her. Everyone except Richard. Because for the first time, he realized I might know something. He just had no idea. How much? The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, but because I hadn't really slept at all. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I had found myself standing in the kitchen, staring through the window at the empty backyard while holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even took the first sip. For 36 years, my life had followed the same quiet rhythm. Wake up. Make breakfast. Go to work. Come home. Take care of everyone else. Repeat. And now, for the first time since I was 24 years old, I had absolutely no idea what came next. The divorce papers were sitting on the dining room table exactly where I had left them. I hadn't signed them yet. Not because I wanted to save the marriage. That part was already over. What I couldn't understand was how everything had ended so quietly. No screaming. No dramatic arguments. No broken plates. Just silence. The kind of silence that settles over a house after someone decides they no longer need you. Around 8 o'clock my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Margaret. She almost never called that early. "Evelyn?" Her voice sounded careful. I heard. I didn't ask how. In small towns, news traveled faster than the mail. "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Are you really?" Nobody had asked me that in years. Not really. People asked if I needed groceries. If I needed a ride. If I needed help moving furniture. But no one had asked whether I was actually okay. I started crying before I could answer. Not loud. Just quietly. The kind of crying you do when you're too exhausted to fight it anymore. Margaret didn't interrupt. She simply stayed on the line until I could breathe again. "You should come stay with me," she finally said. I thanked her. But I said no. There was something I needed to do first. Even though I wasn't sure what it was. After we hung up, I walked into the hallway closet. The box was still there. Exactly where Walter had told me it would be. Covered with the same thin layer of dust. Waiting. I looked at it for several minutes. Then I closed the closet door again. Not today. I wasn't ready. Instead, I drove to the public library. Most people think librarians spend their days putting books back on shelves. Sometimes that's true. But libraries are strange little places. People don't only come looking for information. Sometimes they come looking for hope. Around lunchtime, an older man walked in carrying a grocery bag filled with old photographs. His wife had died 3 months earlier. He wanted to learn how to scan the pictures before they faded. We spent almost 2 hours sitting together at one of the public computers. Every few minutes he'd stop scanning and tell me another story. This was our honeymoon. This was the first house we bought. This one. He smiled. This one was taken the day our daughter was born. When he finally left, he thanked me 3 different times. But the truth was, he hadn't needed someone to teach him how to use a scanner. He had needed someone willing to listen. That's what libraries become after enough years. They're filled with books. But they're really built out of conversations. That afternoon, while organizing returned novels, I caught myself thinking about Walter again. He had always been one of those people who noticed details everyone else ignored. If he had hidden something, he must have believed it mattered. The question that wouldn't leave my mind wasn't what was inside the box. It was why he had trusted me instead of his own sons. There had to be a reason. Walter never did anything by accident. That evening I drove past the old farmhouse. The porch light was off. The grass had grown almost knee-high. A realtor's sign stood near the mailbox. For sale. I'd seen that sign before. Months ago. It was still there. No offers. No buyers. The house looked tired. Not abandoned. Just forgotten. I parked across the road and watched it for a while. I remembered Christmas dinners. Summer cookouts. Walter teaching the grandchildren how to fish in the pond behind the barn. Back then the place had felt alive. Now it felt like it was holding its breath. As I started the car to leave, I noticed something. Someone was standing on the front porch. A man. Tall. Hands in his pockets. Watching my car. I couldn't recognize him from that distance. But he recognized me. Because he raised one hand in a slow wave. Not friendly. Not threatening. Just deliberate. I drove away. Halfway home my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I ignored unknown numbers. Something made me answer. Mrs. Harper? The voice was calm. Professional. Yes? My name is Daniel Ross. A pause. I worked with Walter several years ago. I frowned. I was told he left something with you. Every muscle in my body tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Another pause. I think you do. His voice never changed. Please don't open that box until we speak. The line went dead. I pulled the car onto the side of the road. For almost a full minute. I simply stared at my phone. How could a complete stranger know about the box? Walter had only told me. No one else. At least, that's what I had believed. When I finally got home, the sun was beginning to disappear behind the trees. The house felt quieter than ever. I walked directly to the hallway closet. This time, I opened the door. I reached for the wooden box. Lifted it carefully into my arms. And for the very first time, I noticed something I had somehow missed before. Taped underneath the lid, was a second envelope. Smaller. Thinner. With just 6 handwritten words. Read this before opening anything else. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an eternity. The wooden box rested against my chest. The smaller envelope was still taped beneath the lid. Walter's handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered it. Steady. Careful. Every letter perfectly formed. The words echoed inside my head. Read this before opening anything else. I carried the box into the kitchen and placed it gently on the table. Outside, the last light of the evening disappeared behind the trees. The house had become completely silent. Almost too silent. I peeled the tape away as carefully as I could. The envelope was surprisingly light. Inside was only a single folded sheet of paper. Nothing else. I unfolded it. The date at the top caught my attention immediately. It had been written almost 9 years earlier. Long before Walter became sick. Long before anyone knew his time was running out. The letter began. Evelyn. If you're reading this, it means I was right about one thing. People eventually become interested in what they ignored for years. I stopped reading. A chill ran down my back. Walter wasn't writing to comfort me. He was warning me. I continued. The box itself isn't dangerous. People are. If anyone contacts you before you've finished reading everything inside, trust no one. Not even someone who says they worked for me. Daniel Ross. The man who had called only hours earlier. Walter already knew someone might come. How? I kept reading. There are only 3 people I ever told this secret to. One of them is already dead. One betrayed me. The third. I'm still not sure. I lowered the paper. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it. Walter had spent years hiding something. Not because of money. Not because of property. Because someone had betrayed him. The rest of the letter became even stranger. Before you open the main envelope, answer one question honestly. Why are you opening it? If the answer is revenge, close the box. If the answer is greed, close the box. If the answer is curiosity, think again. Only continue if your answer is responsibility. Responsibility. I whispered the word aloud. It sounded familiar. Walter had always talked that way. Everything in his life had been measured by responsibility. I looked around my empty kitchen. Why was I opening it? Certainly not for revenge. Walter had never hurt me. Money? No. At 62, I had learned that peace was worth more than anything money could buy. Curiosity? Of course I was curious. But that wasn't enough. The truth was much simpler. Walter had trusted me. And I couldn't walk away from that trust. I reached for the brass latch. It clicked softly. The lid opened only halfway before something slid forward. Another letter. Several legal folders. Old photographs. And beneath them, a thick sealed envelope. Much thicker than I expected. Across the front, written in black ink. Property transfer documents. I frowned. Property? Walter had owned very little. At least, that's what everyone believed. I carefully lifted the folders. Beneath them lay dozens of handwritten journals. Each one labeled with a different year. 9 journals. 9 years of notes. I opened the oldest one. The first page contained only a single sentence. Today I discovered something that should never have been hidden. Nothing more. The next pages were filled with dates, addresses, phone numbers, conversations, receipts. Every detail recorded with incredible precision. It wasn't a diary. It was an investigation. Walter had been documenting something for almost a decade. Page after page described meetings with lawyers, county clerks, surveyors, bank employees. Every entry ended exactly the same way. Still waiting. I turned another page. Then another. Hours seemed to disappear. Around midnight I finally reached an entry that mentioned my family. Evelyn still doesn't know. Good. She deserves to live without carrying this burden until the right time. I froze. He had been thinking about me all those years. Planning. Preparing. Trusting me. Without ever saying a word. Then another sentence. If I'm gone before this is finished, she'll know what to do. Tears blurred the page. Walter had believed in me more than I believed in myself. Suddenly, 3 loud knocks echoed through the house. Not gentle knocks. Heavy. Slow. Deliberate. My heart nearly stopped. It was almost midnight. No one visited at midnight. The knocking came again. 3 times. I quietly stood up. Every light in the house was still on. The journals lay open across the kitchen table. I stepped toward the living room window. Carefully moved the curtain aside. A black SUV sat parked across the street. Its headlights were off. A man stood on my front porch. Waiting. He wasn't knocking anymore. He was simply standing there. Looking directly at my front door. Then, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. The same one. I answered without speaking. Daniel Ross's voice came through the speaker. Evelyn. A pause. Whatever you do, don't open the door. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I kept staring through the curtain. The man on my porch hadn't moved. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking around. He was simply waiting. Almost as if he knew I was watching him. Daniel finally broke the silence. Evelyn, are you listening? Yes. Is someone outside? I swallowed. There's a man standing on my porch. Daniel didn't sound surprised. What does he look like? Tall. Gray jacket. Maybe 60 years old. Another pause. Don't answer the door. Who is he? I don't know for certain. But I have a very good guess. Every instinct told me to ask another dozen questions. Instead, I asked the only one that mattered. Who are you? The silence lasted several seconds. Then Daniel sighed. I was Walter's attorney. That wasn't the answer I expected. I've never heard Walter mention you. You weren't supposed to. I looked back toward the porch. The man was still standing there. Perfectly still. Daniel continued. Walter believed that if too many people knew what he had discovered, the documents would disappear before the truth ever reached the right hands. What truth? I can't explain over the phone. Then explain enough. Another long silence. Finally. It isn't just about the property. Those words settled heavily inside my chest. What else is there? It's about why Walter bought that land in the first place. I frowned. Everyone believed Walter had inherited the old farmland from his father. That's what we'd all been told. Daniel answered before I could ask. He didn't inherit it. He bought it. Secretly. Using money no one ever knew he had. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Why would Walter hide something like that? Daniel lowered his voice. And he bought it because someone wanted to make sure nobody else ever owned it. I looked back toward the wooden box. Everything suddenly felt different. The property documents. The journals. The warning. None of it was about money alone. There was something buried underneath all of it. Something Walter had protected for years. The man outside finally moved. He stepped down from the porch. Walked slowly toward the driveway. Then stopped beside my mailbox. He looked directly at my living room window. Raised one hand. And tipped his hat. Not a smile. Not a threat. Just recognition. A few seconds later he walked back to the SUV. The vehicle pulled away without its headlights for nearly half the block before disappearing around the corner. Only then did I breathe again. Daniel spoke softly. He's letting you know he found you. What does that mean? It means we're running out of time. I closed the curtains. My hands were shaking now. Walter spent 9 years preparing for this. Preparing for what? Daniel answered immediately. For the day someone else realized what he knew. I returned to the kitchen table. The journals were still open. The thick property envelope rested beside them. I picked it up carefully. Inside were survey maps. County records. Old purchase contracts. Most were over 40 years old. Then I found a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local farmer refuses multi-million-dollar development offer." The date was nearly 25 years old. The farmer's name, Walter Hayes. I stared at it. 25 years earlier. Someone had offered Walter millions for land that everyone now believed was nearly worthless. Why? The article continued. Walter had refused every offer without explanation. Developers eventually abandoned the project. The story disappeared. But Walter never sold. I reached for another document. This one was handwritten. No signature. No date. Only one sentence. If they ever discover what's under the southern field, everything changes. I read it again. Then a third time. Under the southern field. I unfolded one of the survey maps. There. Near an old creek. Someone had drawn a small red circle. Beside it, Walter had written only 2 words. Not yet. The phone buzzed again. Daniel. Did you find the map? Yes. I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening. Tomorrow morning. Drive to the property. Alone. Do not tell anyone. And whatever happens, don't let anyone see that map. I looked once more at the red circle. What exactly am I looking for? Daniel took a slow breath. Then he said the sentence Walter had apparently repeated many times before he died. You're not looking for what's buried. You're looking for who buried it. The call ended. I stood there for a long time. Outside. The wind had started moving through the old oak trees. Inside. Walter's journals remained open exactly where he had left them. For the first time, I realized this had never been an inheritance. It was an investigation. And somehow, Walter had left me to finish it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red circle on Walter's map. Not yet. Those two words refused to leave my mind. Around 5:30 the next morning, I made a pot of coffee, packed the journals into a canvas bag, slipped the map inside a folder, and locked the wooden box back in the closet. I don't know why. It simply felt wrong to carry everything at once. Walter had always believed that important things should move one step at a time. As the sun began to rise, I drove toward the old property. The roads were almost empty. A thin layer of morning fog still covered the fields, making the familiar landscape feel strangely unfamiliar. I'd driven that road hundreds of times over the years. Yet that morning, every fence, every mailbox, every curve seemed to carry a different meaning. When I reached the entrance, I stopped beside the rusted gate. The realtor's sign was still there. Someone had placed a bright red sticker across it. Under contract. I stared at the words. Yesterday the property had still been for sale. Now, overnight, someone had made an offer. My stomach tightened. Someone else knew. I parked farther down the road and walked the rest of the way. The grass brushed against my legs as I crossed the front yard. The farmhouse looked even older in the morning light. Paint peeled from the porch rails. One shutter hung crooked. Yet somehow, it still felt like Walter was there. Watching. Waiting. I unlocked the front door with the key he had given me years ago. The familiar smell of old wood and dust greeted me immediately. Nothing had changed. His reading glasses still rested beside the recliner. A calendar remained open to the month before he died. His favorite coffee mug sat upside down beside the sink. Time had simply stopped. I walked through each room slowly. Not looking for anything in particular. Just remembering. Walter never rushed through a house. He always said every building tells you something if you're patient enough to listen. Then I noticed something. One floorboard near the fireplace looked newer than the others. It wasn't obvious. Only someone who had spent years in that house would have noticed. I knelt beside it. Ran my fingers along the edge. There was the tiniest gap. Almost invisible. I searched the nearby drawer until I found an old flathead screwdriver. A few careful movements. And the board lifted free. Beneath it sat a small metal box. Much smaller than the wooden one at my house. Inside, there was only one object. An old brass key. Attached to it was a faded paper tag. In Walter's handwriting were 4 simple words. South barn. Lower door. I frowned. Lower door? The barn only had one entrance. Or so I thought. I slipped the key into my pocket and headed outside. The old barn stood nearly 200 yards behind the house. Its red paint had faded almost to brown. Half the roof sagged under its own weight. The large front doors groaned as I pulled them open. Dust floated through the morning sunlight. Old tractors. Broken tools. Empty hay bales. Exactly as I remembered. I walked the length of the building twice before I finally saw it. Near the back wall. Hidden behind stacked lumber. A narrow wooden hatch was built into the floor. I'd never seen it before. Neither had anyone else. At least, not recently. The brass key fit perfectly. The lock clicked. I pulled the hatch upward. Cold air rushed out immediately. Stone steps disappeared into darkness below. I switched on the flashlight I'd brought from the truck. The beam revealed an underground room. Small. Dry. Carefully built. Walter had constructed it decades earlier. I climbed down slowly. Shelves lined every wall. Most were empty. Except for one. On that shelf rested 3 thick binders. A leather notebook. And a locked steel case. Everything was covered in dust. Everything except the steel case. Someone had touched it recently. I froze. There were fresh fingerprints across the lid. Not mine. Not Walter's. Someone had been inside this room. Very recently. At that exact moment. I heard footsteps above me. Slow. Heavy. Crossing the barn floor. I turned off the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. The footsteps stopped directly over the hatch. For several long seconds. Nothing happened. Then, a man's voice echoed through the silence. I know you're down there. I didn't move. I've been waiting a very long time for someone to find Walter's room. The voice was calm. Older. Almost friendly. Which somehow frightened me even more. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. My name is Daniel Ross. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Daniel Ross. The same man who had warned me not to trust anyone. The same man who had called me twice. And now, he was standing directly above me. The underground room suddenly felt much smaller. The air seemed heavier. I kept my flashlight turned off. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel's voice came again. If Walter chose you, then he was right. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. How do I know you're really Daniel? A quiet laugh echoed through the barn. You don't. And Walter expected that. There was something about the way he spoke. Not hurried. Not demanding. Patient. Exactly the way Walter used to explain difficult things. After several seconds, he continued. Look on the second shelf. Left side. There should be a blue notebook. I slowly reached toward the shelf. Even in the darkness, my fingers found it. A faded blue notebook. Exactly where he had said. Open the first page. I switched the flashlight on just enough to read. Across the top, Walter had written only one sentence. If Daniel is standing above you, let him in. I stared at the words. Then slowly climbed the stone steps. When I pushed open the hatch, an older man stepped back to give me room. Gray hair. Weathered face. Simple clothes. Nothing about him suggested wealth or power. He looked more like a retired teacher than a lawyer. He removed his hat. I'm sorry we had to meet this way. So am I. For a long moment we simply looked at each other. Finally I asked. Why didn't you tell me everything yesterday? He smiled sadly. Because I wasn't sure anyone else was listening. He glanced toward the open barn doors. Then toward the road. They've been watching this place for years. My stomach tightened. They? Daniel nodded. The people who tried to buy Walter's land. The same people who never understood why he refused. I folded my arms. You still haven't told me what was so valuable. He looked directly into my eyes. It wasn't what was in the ground. It was what was written about the ground. I frowned. I don't understand. You will. He walked down into the underground room and carefully placed the steel case on the old wooden table. From his coat pocket, He removed another key. So Walter gave you one. He kept the other. The lock opened with a soft click. Inside were dozens of documents. Engineering reports. Environmental surveys. Letters from state officials. Old photographs. Everything perfectly organized. Daniel handed me the oldest report. Start there. The date surprised me. 43 years earlier. Long before Walter had retired. The report described underground water movement beneath 3 neighboring counties. I kept reading. Halfway down the page, I stopped. Beneath Walter's property was one of the largest untouched freshwater aquifers in western North Carolina. I looked up. Daniel nodded. Exactly. The developers weren't buying farmland. They were buying water. The realization settled over me slowly. Water. Not oil. Not gold. Water. Something that would only become more valuable as the years passed. Walter had known. Somehow. He had discovered it before anyone else. But why hide it? Daniel answered immediately. Because once private companies controlled it, they could control every town around it. He spread several maps across the table. Colored lines covered the pages. Pipelines. Reservoir plans. Future developments. Entire communities depended on that underground water. Walter hadn't been protecting land. He'd been protecting people. I suddenly remembered something from one of his journals. Today I discovered something that should never have been hidden. Now it made sense. Daniel opened another folder. Inside were letters Walter had written but never mailed. One was addressed to the governor. Another to a federal environmental agency. Another to me. I looked at him. Why didn't he send these? Daniel sighed. Because he stopped believing the system would protect the truth. He believed people would. He believed you. I felt tears filling my eyes again. Walter hadn't chosen me because I was the smartest. Or the strongest. He chose me because he trusted my character. Nothing more. Nothing less. Suddenly, a loud engine roared outside. Daniel's expression changed instantly. He moved toward the barn entrance. A black pickup truck had stopped beside the gate. 2 men stepped out. Neither looked familiar. One pointed toward the barn. They found us, Daniel whispered. How? He looked at me. The property went under contract yesterday. That wasn't a buyer. It was bait. The 2 men started walking across the field. Slowly. Confidently. As if they already owned everything. Daniel closed the steel case. There isn't time anymore. He handed it to me. No matter what happens. Don't let them take this. The footsteps outside grew louder. Then one of the men called out. We're not here to cause trouble. We only want to talk. Daniel looked at me one last time. Then quietly said. That's exactly what Walter warned me they'd say. And before I could answer, the barn doors began to open. The barn door swung open slowly. Morning sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. The 2 men stepped inside without asking permission. Neither one smiled. The older of the 2 looked around the underground room before speaking. You found more than we expected. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he stood directly between them and me. The steel case felt heavier than it had only seconds before. The younger man finally spoke. "Mrs. Harper. We're prepared to make this very easy." He reached into his coat and removed a folder. Inside was a purchase agreement. Blank except for one number. $5 million. My eyes lingered on it for only a second. Then I closed the folder and handed it back. "No." The older man didn't seem surprised. "Perhaps you misunderstood. That isn't our final offer." "It doesn't matter." He looked at Daniel. "I warned Walter this day would come." Daniel answered quietly. "No. You warned him that money could solve everything. And he spent the rest of his life proving you wrong." The younger man sighed. "You have documents that don't belong to you." Daniel smiled for the first time. "They belong to the truth." For several long seconds, no one moved. Finally, the older man removed his glasses. "When this becomes public, every corporation involved will deny everything. They'll bury you in lawsuits. They'll drag this through the courts for years. You'll lose." I surprised myself by answering before Daniel could. "Maybe. But it won't stay buried." Silence. The older man looked at me carefully, almost studying me. Then something unexpected happened. He nodded. Not with approval. With resignation. I was hoping Walter had chosen someone easier. He turned toward the barn door. "Come on." The younger man stared at him. "That's it?" The older man looked back one last time. "We lost this 20 years ago. We just didn't know it." They walked away without another word. I watched the truck disappear beyond the hill. Only after it was completely gone did I realize my hands were trembling. Daniel let out a long breath. Walter would have been proud. I looked down at the steel case. No. He would have reminded me that this isn't over. Daniel smiled. "You're beginning to sound like him." Over the following months, everything changed. The documents were delivered to state investigators. Environmental agencies reopened files that had been closed decades earlier. Journalists began asking questions no one had asked before. County officials admitted that important reports had quietly disappeared over the years. Not everyone was happy. Some powerful people lost very profitable opportunities. Others lost positions they had held for decades. But the aquifer remained protected. The farmland was placed into a permanent conservation trust. No corporation would ever own it. No private company would ever control the water beneath it. Exactly as Walter had hoped. People often ask whether the documents made me rich. The answer is simple. No. Walter never wanted that. The trust paid enough to preserve the land forever. Nothing more. Sometimes people look disappointed when they hear that. As though every story should end with someone becoming a millionaire. But I think they miss the point. Walter wasn't protecting money. He was protecting tomorrow. About a year later, the county dedicated a small walking trail beside the property. There wasn't a statue. There wasn't a giant ceremony. Just a simple wooden sign. It read, "Walter Hayes Preserve." Beneath it, one sentence. "Some things become valuable only because someone refused to sell them." I visit that trail every spring. Sometimes I bring flowers. Sometimes I simply sit on the old bench overlooking the field. Children play there now. Families hike those paths. Most of them have no idea what almost happened beneath their feet. And honestly, I hope they never have to know. Because the best victories are often the invisible ones. The ones that allow ordinary people to keep living ordinary lives. A few weeks before Daniel passed away, he mailed me one final envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Walter and Daniel. Standing in that same barn nearly 30 years earlier. Both smiling. On the back, Walter had written one final message. If you're reading this, then the land is finally safe. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. I cried harder reading those words than I had at Walter's funeral. Not because I was sad. Because I finally understood something. Walter had never expected to win. He had simply decided that some battles were worth fighting, even if someone else had to finish them. I think about that almost every day. Because every family leaves something behind. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's property. Sometimes it's mistakes. But every now and then, someone leaves behind courage. The kind that quietly waits for the next person willing to carry it. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance any of us can receive. So before I leave you tonight, I want to ask you something. If someone trusted you with a secret that could change countless lives, would you protect it? Even if it cost you everything? Or would you walk away and let someone else carry that burden? Write protect in the comments if you believe some things are worth defending no matter the price. Or write let go if you think peace is more important than fighting battles that aren't yours. I read every single comment because your thoughts are often just as powerful as these stories. And if this story stayed with you even for a few minutes, please consider subscribing before you go. There are many more stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Until next time, take care of the people who trust you. Because trust, once given, may become the most valuable thing you'll ever hold. People often ask me whether Emily did the right thing. Whether she should have opened that envelope the day she found it. Or whether she waited far too long. I've thought about that question more than once. And the truth is, I don't think this story was ever about choosing the perfect moment. I think it was about choosing the right reason. Emily never kept that secret because she wanted revenge. She never dreamed about humiliating anyone. She simply refused to let anger decide the future. She waited until the truth could protect people instead of destroying them. And maybe that's the hardest lesson any of us will ever learn. Because life gives us moments when we can react. Or we can prepare. Most people react. Very few prepare. This story also reminded me of something else. The people who truly change our lives are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who quietly keep promises. Who protect others when nobody is watching. Who choose integrity even when nobody would blame them for doing otherwise. Money comes and goes. Houses can be sold. Documents can disappear. But character stays. So let me ask you something. If you were in Emily's place, would you have opened the envelope the very first day? Or would you have waited until the right moment, just like she did? Type open if you would have revealed everything immediately. Or type wait if you believe patience is sometimes the strongest choice. I read every single comment, and I'm always amazed by how differently people see the same story. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Tell me your country. And what time it is where you are right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel across the world. If this story stayed with you even for a few minutes, please consider subscribing before you leave. This channel is built for people who enjoy thoughtful stories about family, difficult choices, hidden truths, and the quiet moments that can change an entire life. There are many more stories waiting for you. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Take care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next story. This story is a fictional work inspired by real emotional experiences. All names, characters, places, and events have been created or reimagined for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.